with the potential for observatory bedrooms, insanely excellent R ratings for green energy and whatnot. Thank you guys, Ethan.
So first,
Mike.
I want to make sure Ethan is not a supervillain constructing a lair.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, a weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Editorial Director Andrew Zellner.
Morning, Patrick.
Fine Homebuilding Editorial Advisor Mike Girton.
Hi, Patrick.
And our amazing producer Jeff Rose.
Hello.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. As always, it's a pleasure to see you guys. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
Andrew, it doesn't look like you're at home. Where are you at?
So I am, right after this, headed to the Texas Building Science Symposium here in Austin, Texas. And I'm staying at my friend's house, who's actually an arborist for the city of Austin. So we've been spending the last couple of days talking trees. And
Oh, cool.
How do you grow stuff in Austin? And, basically all his time is spent coordinating watering right now because it's been a drought this last year.
Did you have him on your Keep Craft Alive podcast?
Yeah.
I listened to
back this summer.
Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Can I guess that folks in Austin take their trees very seriously and do their best to protect them?
I'd say it's probably 50-50. There's a ton of development going on in Austin right now. And there's some laws in place that trees over a certain diameter, can't be disturbed. So I think it's something over 20 inches. But the fine for that is planting a bunch of new trees and paying some money. And unfortunately, it seems like a lot of developers are just opting for the fine and kind of disturbing whatever trees are there. But even 20 new trees aren't the equivalent of 100-year-old tree, as far as, everything trees bring us.
Sure.
Yeah.
So folks who listen to the podcast regularly will be familiar with the Building Science Symposiums we've been going to. Can you tell us a little bit about who's on the docket for this show?
So this show, we've got Steve Basic, Jake Bruton, Ben Bogey, Glenn Mathewson, Allison Bales, and Mariana Pickering. And then we've got a special guest this time who hasn't appeared at either of the other symposiums, Peter Yost, who I'm really excited to see. And he's doing a little bit of a building science game show, I guess. So that should be fun.
I think it's kind of like diagnostics things, right? He's proposing these scenarios and asking for help solving what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Except he knows the answers.
Right. Unlike the Fine Homebuilding podcast.
Peter does a great job with his presentations and the way he addresses it. We saw him at the 2021 Building Science Symposium in Kansas City, and he's entertaining and informational. So a lot of times you listen to people who are very technically oriented and you kind of, I won't say fall asleep, but you kind of, it doesn't all sink in. But the way Peter does it in engaging different parts of your brain, it really makes the points that he's trying to get across of building science on a street level, a builder level, really sink in.
You've been working on any projects, Andrew?
So I haven't been working on them, but Jill has. So we've been, I roughed in a half bath on our first floor. So that involved bisecting a space and framing a wall. And so I've got one very straight plumb wall in my 1906 house. And we decided we wanted to wallpaper that room on all four sides. And Jill spent the better part of a week figuring out how to hang this. It's maybe 100 square feet of wallpaper. It's just a 4x4 bathroom. But we learned a lot about if it looks good, it is good. And, where you start and end wallpaper in a room is a huge deal.
I I think the if it looks good, it is good is a good ethic for working on old houses, because you have to decide what's fixable and what is the house, right?
And Jill's graphic designer and illustrator by trade, and so she's used to working in fractions of an inch very precisely on a screen. And she's also an artist and like works with her hands and stuff. But I'm glad. Well, first of all, I'm glad our half bath only has room for one person to be in it. But I'm glad she just like went for it and figured it out, and all I had to do was provide tools and food and drinks. So
cool.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike? You've been working on the houses?
Yeah, like usual. And now with the daylight change, that's kind of tough. This gets dark by 4:30. But yeah, I've been getting another rental house ready for sale. One of my tenants, another one, decided to move in November and beginning of December. So going through that place, just painted the exterior before the deep cold gets set in. And I had not checked the radon exhaust fan. There's, as you talked about in other podcasts, radon's a concern in homes. And I was just going around checking all of the systems, making sure they're all working properly, heating system, air conditioning, and so on, before a home inspector flags it. And I noticed that the radon fan was not working. And what I found is that most radon fans, the pipe goes like straight up, either through the roof or alongside the house. So water is always going down that, even though you think of a little 4-inch pipe, not much water. Well, it actually rusted out the motor. So now I put a new fan motor in and then put a T on top of that 4-inch pipe. That way water won't come in, but the air can go up and go up, sideways. So hopefully it won't be a problem for the future owners.
So you think it's rain coming in the pipe, not condensation from the damp soil?
I don't think it's going to be condensation. I mean, it could be, but I'm thinking that because the fan motor is spinning all the time, that there isn't a whole lot of chance for that condensation to get onto the moving parts. I could be completely wrong. I'm just speculating on that. But I think it's probably more due to this past year in particular. We've had some really heavy dumps of rain, so it's probably getting 3 or 4 inches of rain over the course of 2 or 3 days down that pipe. And, well, it could be either. Maybe it's a combination. It doesn't matter. It costs $209 for the new fan, and it's all fixed in 15 minutes. So
how did you know it was not working? I've seen little gauges on those that indicate the pressure, right? It's got a little fluid and a U-shaped tube.
Precisely. Yep. And it had this little line and an arrow. And it says, if the red fluid gets below this line, call for service.
Who'd you call?
Well, the funny thing was it had that sticker on there, but there was no phone number to call. So I would have thought that whoever installed it would have been, used that as a marketing strategy for, repairs and replacement.
Is the fan up in the attic or is it in the basement?
In this case, it's in the attic on this house, but on a couple of other houses I had or have, it was run through the outside. They ran up through the slab in the basement, and they went horizontally through the wall at the rim joist, and then they went up the exterior. In this case, the garage was an attached garage, so they could pop out into the garage and run right straight up through the adjoining roofs between the main house and the garage. And that way, it was a much cleaner looking installation. So I'm glad they did it that way aesthetically, so you don't have that pipe and fan up the side of the house.
I see that a lot around here.
I think the fan needs to be installed outside of conditioned space. So if it does stop spinning, that the radon gas doesn't get stuck there. Is that something?
I don't know. I've always when I put them in new houses, I've always installed the motor up in the attic just because sound, you don't want it in the house. In
or
this
to
case,
look at it on the exterior of the building, which is what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and the nice thing is the radon fans, they're plastic body. They look like a flying saucer, kind of a little squatter.
They look like a turbo.
Yeah, and they do look like a turbo, and they're made for exterior installation, so they are durable enough in that the UV light doesn't degrade the plastic or anything, or at least not on a short-term basis.
You were talking about the aesthetics. The things that I've seen people do to hide them is to run, instead of 4-inch plastic pipe, they run a piece of downspout up the side of the wall on the exterior to make it look more like it belongs there, I guess, but it's still kind of funny looking.
Do they connect the fan to the downspout?
Yeah,
Downspout
instead
pipe?
of they just use that as pipe instead of plastic pipe.
Wow, I've never seen that.
Sometimes there's like an elbow that goes over the eave, which is hilarious.
Yeah, it does look weird, no matter which way they do it.
Jeff, what have you been up to?
Mostly blowing leaves and some auto maintenance, but
Anything fun on the car?
uh,
Turbos?
not really. No turbos. No, just a evaporation tank solenoid, vent solenoid.
Oh, those are always bad. So, like, I'm sure you got a bunch of rust and dirt in your eyes going under the car to change that.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
think I'm still picking it out of my teeth.
It's horrible. So, I've been doing a little carpentry work around the house. I like open overhangs, eaves, right? I like seeing rafter tails, and so I did that on the barn in an effort to give it a little zip and save some money, right? But I found that sparrows also like open overhangs, and it's become a problem. They nest in the barn overhang now, so I've been closing those up. I started with the lowest side to try and get a procedure down to tackle the higher parts of the building, and it went pretty smooth.
So where do the birds actually attach their nest to? Because usually they need something horizontal or a little ledge of some sort.
I don't know, Mike. I loved it at first because the phoebes were using the cavities for nesting, and they're cool birds. The sparrows, I have a less affinity for. So I don't know how they're doing it. There would seem there's no flat surface for them to nest on, that they do it against the blocking I have between the rafters.
Wow. Surprised the nest wouldn't just fall off.
It's loads of mud and bird poop, I suspect, is what is holding it to the blocking.
Well, I guess
pretty
that makes
gross.
sense. I've been kayaking through some ledge overhangs out west where the swallows, the cliff swallows, will actually attach their nest on the underside of a cliff overhang. So I guess sparrows have figured it out too.
At least the ones in my neighborhood have.
So what is the carpentry you've been doing?
So I'm putting soffit boards on the bottom side of the rafters, and I have board siding that's irregular in thickness, so it involves a little cutting and fitting and maybe a Scotia molding to make it look good.
Sounds like a lot of work that you weren't planning on doing.
That's why I've put it off for 10 years. Pump jacks. Any thoughts on pump jacks, Mike?
Do you have some? Or
No,
you're
but it's
looking
like the most affordable way to make staging. I think you'd agree.
Yeah. So they got the two kinds, the old style that hopefully nobody uses anymore, which crawl up a 4x4 and two 2x4s nailed together, which are kind of sketchy, or the aluminum pole style. And some people will default to a couple of the name brands I found years ago of the aluminum pole style. I found a company, I want to say it's in Minnesota, and I forgot their name, but if you want it, I can get it to you. And their prices were like at least 30% less.
It's still
And
going to be
they
$1,000 or
delivered.
$2,000, right?
Oh yeah. You're going to spend some money.
No
But
way, man.
they're great. I mean, it's like it's one of the few tools that I use very infrequently, but it's the one that's out on loan most of the time. So all of my construction friends, they're so I have so many free offers for help or anything just from all the loans I've been making with it. But yeah, you can rent. You find somebody like me who's nearby who has some, and just borrow it because they're probably not using it.
I was thinking of, as you might imagine, Facebook Marketplace is loaded with pump jacks of all flavors. The good ones, as you suggest, are, still worth thousands of dollars, even used. And you can buy, the old rusty steel ones for, less than 100 oftentimes.
Yeah. I just gave mine away because I didn't want them anymore.
They pinch your fingers just picking them up to move them, right?
Well, the new ones are the same. The jack itself still functions similarly. So you pick up the aluminum jack if it's not on the pole, and yeah, you can get your fingers pinched into one of the moving parts. So it doesn't resolve that, but the poles themselves are so much more stable. How high up do you have to get?
Not very high. The highest work is probably 20 feet up.
Okay.
Or, it's like waist level 20 feet. Like,
I'm
going to be standing at 16 is my guess.
If you do purchase them, what I recommend is rather than buying, some 22 or 24 foot poles, to buy 12s or 13s. And the reason for that is I find I use them a lot on ranch houses or cape houses where I only have to go up like 12 or 14 feet.
Yeah.
And that way you get, buy 2 poles, but buy them in 2 by 4 12-foot sections, and that way you can use it on a lower house at the future, if you ever get another house that's lower.
If I'm doing this work again, it's going to be on a lower house. It's going to be, 12 feet off the ground. So, Mike, you had a great idea for the after show, and it involves one of the feedback emails we got, which we'll get to in just a little bit. Do you want to tell folks what we're going to talk about in the after show for members of the Fine Homebuilding community?
We're going to talk a little bit about chemical sensitivities that some people have in homes, particularly new homes, and how to make a house a little more, safer for them, I guess is the best way to put it, for their health.
So this email we got from Paul in Central California, I think is a good introduction to, this conversation. Hi, Patrick. Greetings to you and the crew. Forgive me for raising an old and contentious question, but I haven't yet been satisfied with the answers. I know that air sealing has become an article of faith in the building science community. The appropriacy of reducing air movement through the building envelope is no longer questioned by anyone. I get why. Air sealing's impact on energy efficiency cannot be denied and shouldn't be ignored. Still, I have my reservations, and I hope you'll hear me out. I started working as a finished carpenter in my 20s with my dad. He was very talented and worked on high-end custom homes, ringing the gated, man-made lakes in town. I thought I would be getting a lot of great exercise and fresh air. The reality was somewhat different. Every day involved exposure to some new, toxic substance, unhealthy dust from engineered woods with formaldehyde glues, off gases from plastic flex trim, columns made of exotic foams, paints and thinners, solvents, glues of all kinds. Everything was extremely toxic, and I was breathing it all on a daily basis. I made it about a year before I was too weak to stand and too chemically sensitive to go out in public. Obviously, I couldn't continue in construction, so I left and spent the next 2 decades rebuilding the health I lost in that year. It was hell. The most important part of my recovery was keeping my air quality high. I'm keenly aware of air quality in any space I enter. It's no secret that the air outside a building is often better than the air inside, and I can verify that personally. Most homes, including new homes, have dismal air quality. Commercial buildings are often a little better, a problem compounded by the new plastic products inside, still off-gassing chemicals from their manufacturer. Every time I hear FHB talk about air sealing, I'm reminded of all the toxic compounds going into the average building. I noticed in episode 409 that indoor air quality is finally registering on the building science radar. That's good, and it encourages me to ask the old, tired question again: how wise is the current obsessive focus on air sealing, air sealing, air sealing, air sealing, to the exclusion of occupant health? With so much toxicity built into the average new home, it strikes me as very unwise to seal that all in forever. But some people and pets inside put some people and pets inside a few years of poor housekeeping, pet mess, mold, dander, cleaning chemicals, and poisonous air fresheners to hide the stink, and you've created the next public health catastrophe. In a discipline where everything is a metric and a test, from R values to J values to blower door numbers, etc., what is the metric that building science uses to measure indoor air quality and guarantee it stays high? I appreciate how conscientious you all are and hope you'll finally give this question the consideration it deserves. Thank you, Paul from Central California. Whoa, I wasn't expecting this, right?
I'm
What do
not
you think,
surprised,
Andrew?
though.
No? Why?
Well, because it's a concern I hear from lots and lots of builders as the energy codes have become more attentive to energy conservation with each new code update. The builders who are all of a sudden have to, or they're being told they got to air seal the houses and meet these standards. You know, like right now, pretty much for most of the North America, it's 3 air changes per hour. And if they've been building fairly leaky houses and thinking the old mantra of a house has to breathe, then when they start building these homes at 3 air changes per hour, they say, well, we're going to kill our occupants because they're going to get all of these chemicals. They're not going to have good ventilation. So it is recognized amongst at least the builders that are moving from that old school mentality to the realization that they have to make houses tighter and the ramifications that that introduces. So essentially they're admitting that, yeah, we're using materials that have a lot of potential toxicity to the homeowners, but they're also thinking back to the old school method of building a leaky house, which is going to allow that those toxic chemicals to be diluted.
Andrew, do you have thoughts on this? And are there speakers like in past building science symposiums talking on this subject?
They're absolutely speakers. And actually, Allison Bales, I believe, is talking tomorrow at the Texas Building Science Symposium. So when the first one this year in Kansas, both him and Ben Bogey brought an air quality monitor with them to the symposium. And I was sitting next to Ben as he was getting alerts on his phone that like air quality is getting worse and worse. And I think it was the carbon dioxide levels were building up because we were a bunch of people in a room together. But you know, the thing, you know, the builders who are speaking are, you know, high performance builders, people focused on building science. And it's not really for them a question of like if they should be concerned about indoor air quality, but it's more like their clients can afford the $100 to buy an indoor air quality monitor, and they're going to put it in any new home that they move into, and then are going to ask questions about the indoor air quality. So as a builder, what steps are you taking to make sure that the indoor air quality, one, is good, and that two, you can help them understand how a high performance house works. And I think it comes down to mechanical ventilation. But the thing they haven't really discussed is sort of the toxicity of building materials, which I think is like the other part of the equation.
And I think that's what Paul is getting to with his last comment there. It's like, what are the metrics for those chemicals?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, how is it quantified to a level that we have monitors that monitor those chemicals that then we could put in a house that people could either you know, monitor for their own health. With the monitors that Ben and Allison had or were talked about, what was the chemicals that they were monitoring?
So I think there was VOC equivalent monitoring, you know, oxygen and carbon dioxide.
Ask Jeff. Jeff, what does yours measure?
So it does measure VOCs, carbon dioxide, particulate matter,
Mm-hmm.
And radon.
And
it's, you know, obvious that this is such a good conversation point because it's all I've been able to think about since I came home from that and learned that Ben was monitoring there in that building. And it's funny right now, if y'all heard the truck drive by my office, it's because I have the window open 3 inches because I have, you know, chainsaws and a generator in here. And of course I, you know, worry about that now. And it's a great topic of conversation. This comes from Nat, who has some thoughts on reclaiming hardwood flooring, and it's kind of long, but it's fun read, so I'll share it with y'all. Hey, Fine Homebuilding podcast crew. Hope you all are doing well and that you've gotten to enjoy some of the gorgeous fall weather. I wanted to send a quick update on our flooring salvage, which was discussed in podcast 489. The tips you offered were definitely helpful, especially the one about patience. Here are some other tips for anyone undertaking a demo project like this. Number 1, get a tetanus shot. You will probably need it. 2, get comfortable, functional PPE. Don't skimp here. Eye protection, ear protection, dust masks or respirators, long sleeves, and sturdy shoes or boots are pretty much mandatory. 3, limber up. A stretching routine and good physical therapist are not a bad idea. 4, find the right tools. Anything that minimizes bending over and maximizes production is going to go a long way here. For me, a framing hammer, long Wonder Bar style pry bar, and reciprocating saw are all I needed to pop the flooring up with minimal damage and maximum speed. Steady but not fast, in case you were wondering. Sawhorses, a pneumatic denailing tool, and quick clamps make bundling easier. It says dial in your process and get into production mode. Have some good podcasts and music in the queue. Embrace the experience. You get to salvage flooring! ! Take time for fresh air and rejuvenation after each session. This is a marathon, not a sprint. In case anyone is curious, this is our process. Find the tongue side of the flooring and use a circular saw and oscillating multi-tool to cut the first floorboard. Remember to set your depth. Cutting about 2 inches from the wall seemed to work well. 2 cuts may be required if you're leaving the base trim in place. 2, use the oscillating tool, cut out a rectangle at one end of the separated board and remove it. From this weakness, use your pry bar of choice to remove the strip you cut. This board will likely be face nailed and should come up or split out pretty easily. If you're trying to save as much of the square footage as possible, you need to carefully pry out each nail and rotate the first few rows out until they have space for your reciprocating saw. Throughout this whole process, it is very important to treat every row of boards as if they were a single plank to minimize splitting and maximize production. Once you get your reciprocating saw under the flooring, cut each nail in the exposed row. The flooring should then want to pop out with little persuasion. After trying a few different blades, I settled on thick wood with nails demo type blades. 9-inch Milwaukee axe blades are my go-to. These have a thicker shank and don't break as quickly as the thinner bimetal blades and aren't as expensive as the carbide tipped ones. The extra length reduces the strain on the shank and lets you use more of the blade as sections get dull. The 5-packs cost about $10 on sale, and I get a couple hundred square feet removed per blade. Once the boards are free, they go to the sawhorses for denailing. I was loaned an air locker AP700 by a friend, and it was so useful I bought one for myself almost immediately. I can't imagine doing this project without one. After denailing, the boards are clamped together and then affixed to one another in manageable bundles with masking tape. The idea is that this makes them easy to transport and store and helps keep them from twisting and warping until they can be installed. We were able to pull about 10 square feet per person per hour with this process. Our flooring is only 2 inches wide, so anything wider should go a good bit faster. We still have some cleanup and patching to do, but this project should save us between $5,000 and $7,000 in total, and I conservatively estimate it'll be worth tax-free $30 an hour when all is said and done. Not a bad second job. We also love manual labor. We are keeping good material out of the landfill. We get to install flooring with character in our farmhouse rebuild, and my wife and I are having a shared experience, albeit type 2 fun at times. We also get to work in a time capsule. I've included some pictures of my favorite ads from underneath that they used in portions of the house. A women's journal from around 1916. You can barely make out the date in the top right corner of the cushioned heels / laxative ads page. Oh my goodness. All of this makes the project worthwhile in our eyes, and if that weren't enough, some of our work is going back into the community. We were able to carefully remove and salvage all of the 8-inch baseboard trim in the house, which along with the doors and much of the other trim went into a historic renovation downtown, a collaboration between our town and the local affordable housing nonprofit. The house is nearing completion and will become low-income housing for a lucky resident in the near future. While finishes may not seem too consequential, it is nice knowing that we saved the town and nonprofit a chunk of change that can go back into the program and be used for more affordable housing projects. That is our update. I hope it's helpful for someone out there. Thanks as always for great content, Nat. Nat, that was fantastic. Thank you for writing. I appreciate all the time that must have taken you to do that. What do you think?
I think he wrote an article for us. If he's got some photos to go along with it, we could pretty much edit that right down to a few panels, because that's a really great process that he used, one that I've used myself.
I would have never thought to cut the nails with a Sawzall, right? That makes all the sense in the world.
Do you have a pneumatic nail removal tool, either of you?
No.
I do. There's a couple on the market. One is the air locker, which those go for around $50 or $60, which is actually a pretty good price. They're
I'm
pretty small,
amazed it's that
compact.
inexpensive. Wow.
Yep. They are the reasonable ones. They're not great at They're good for flooring or sheathing nails. They're not good at driving like 16 penny nails out of 2x. For that, you need a tool that's called a nail kicker, and those go for between
hundreds.
Hmm?
They go for hundreds, right?
Yeah, they go for like $2 to $350, somewhere in that range. But I made my own up out of an old framing nailer. If anybody digs up the old article that we did from, it was probably like 4 or 5 years ago, on putting ventilation in an old roof by pulling the roof sheathing off. I took an old framing nailer, modified it so that the driver would stick out an extra 3/4 of an inch past the nose by grinding off the nose piece. That's
So it overdrove the nail right
Exactly.
through the board into the rafter.
And that's what these tools do. They have long snouts, long drivers. Then you slip the snout over the nail and you pull the trigger, and the driver pushes the nail out through the other side, which is really efficient.
I think we should call our lawyer Andrew about Mike's
let me get
advice
Andrew
for
on the podcast here real quick.
modifying nailers.
My other question, the limbering up portion of it, I like. Do either of you have a pre-work routine or any sort of regular exercise or stretching you do outside of your workday?
Well, this weekend, Andrew, it was setting up the staging to reach the work. That was the leading up to limbering up process. How about you, Mike?
It's you. I don't do anything special for limbering up. Usually it's just taking it slow, and then just, if we're going to be laying out plates all day, for framing walls, then, I'll take it a little easy, bending over, stretching as I'm actually laying the plates out and starting to mark them. And then
Drink lots of water.
Yeah.
I've found to be helpful. Like, I've had serious muscle back spasms from getting dehydrated. I'm sure it's related to that. How about you, Jeff? You do some yoga before you deal with your leaves?
I don't generally. I do some not really systematic stretching, but I do some stretching, mostly upper body stuff. But
There was I think it was a popular woodworking article from like the mid 2010s, but it was Tai Chi for woodworkers. Like the sort of like slow, deliberate movements are also the same movements you need to like hand plane effectively. But I'm also thinking about, in Minnesota, where this year we're supposed to get like more snow than we have in the last few years. But like that first like snow shoveling exertion thing is something that, you don't build up your snow shoveling muscles and cardio until, halfway through that season. But the idea that you need to like warm up and like do work when you're not like playing sports, I think is something that can get lost on folks, especially as they get into the trades or start working on their homes in a significant capacity.
I like how Nat reminded us that, not everything is a sprint. You just, some things just need hours of work, and you might as well just lean into it and not kill yourself right away, because it is the long haul is what matters.
I think Mike's advice about starting slow and being, deliberate is good advice.
Our first question comes from Barbara. Dear podcast, I've been pondering John Spear's article in the October issue about stair stringer cut lines, Because the lumber will shrink along the axis, John says to add 1/8 inch to the riser height and step length to compensate. It makes sense. My question is, does this apply to interior staircases or just deck stairs? Because the article was actually about deck stairs. A quick answer is sufficient. Then you can move on to more interesting listener questions. Your faithful follower, Barbara. I don't think it's that Barbara. It's another Barbara, but we've heard from her before. Mike, what do you say?
It depends on the moisture content of the wood and the changes that you expect to happen over time. It's the whole point of John's article is that you're getting pressure treated wood, which is usually wet after production, and it's going
Way
to
wet,
shrink
like
quite
20%, right? It's just crazy wet.
Yeah,
Dripping,
yeah, and so it's going to shrink a lot. And then you get that differential movement due to the cross grain cuts that you put into the tread and riser cuts. So you're going to get that even if you're doing it on the interior, if you're using wet wood or somewhat higher moisture content wood. And then even seasonally, depending on whether you live in a humid area and you don't have good dehumidification, you could get that whole action of that wood changing in your stairs changing throughout the years, which is one of the reasons why you find a lot of builders, at least for their interior stairs now, using an engineered lumber for their stringers, either LVL or a timber strand lumber.
LSL.
LSL, there you go, thanks. Yeah. Which don't have that same impact of the grain, where you're going to get that differential shrinkage.
And hardwoods, are generally kiln dried for, interior millwork. So assuming it's not gotten soaking wet somehow, it would, I don't think you need to do this. But the answer is you have to measure the moisture content of the wood. Andrew, pinless versus pinned moisture meters, right? Mm-hmm. Something woodworkers pay a lot of attention to. You can't be driving pins into your finished material. Do the surface ones work?
I think it really depends on the thickness of your lumber. Most interior trim 3/4 of an inch or less, they seem to do a good job. But it's also the practice of making sure the house is ideally conditioned and then letting your wood acclimate inside in that conditioned space. All will also go a long way toward minimizing movement.
It's a great question, Barbara. Thanks for that one. This comes from F. Crick on our YouTube podcast page. My sill plate is embedded in the top of my foundation wall, so it's only exposed on the outside and the top, and there's concrete in the way on the side, so it can only be seen from above or from outside if the siding were removed. Is that unusual? Is there a reason that's not more common? It's a late 50s house in the Seattle area. Anyone heard about this? Jeff?
I've seen it on block foundations.
So the block continues up into the joist cavity? Mike, you're nodding.
I've seen it. Yeah, I'm just nodding with Jeff's comment. Yeah.
What do we?
So where I've seen it is, and we've done it when we have a door, either a garage door coming down or a door going through the side of the garage, a regular hinge door, where we'll recess down in the concrete as we're pouring a slab, so that you get essentially a built-in back dam. So from that logic, it seems that maybe those were some builders who were thinking about the way moisture would be driven into that mudsill to foundation joint. Probably at the time the building was built, there weren't good sealing materials, so they were forming in a back dam.
Cool. I would think it would help with air sealing as well. Am I right? Like you suddenly have something behind the mudsill, which is a notoriously leaky area.
Tortured pathway for the air. And as all the debris and dirt fills in that joint, between this backside,
it's only going to get tighter and tighter.
It's only going to get tighter and tighter. Exactly.
I don't think it's normal, but in that period of time, I can say I've seen all kinds of weird construction methods. They were figuring things out, I think, to build on a huge scale, and some things caught on regionally and nationally, and some things didn't.
I think about it from a repair and replacement perspective, where it would be really hard to do a repair from the inside of that sill if it ever rotted out. You'd almost have to attack it from the outside.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that is something that happens to houses that have, bulk water for sure.
And are we assuming this is a foundation wall and not like a slab on grade situation?
I think it's probably a basement or a crawl space.
Or crawl space? Okay.
Yeah, because I think they would say slab.
I was thinking about is like it could like in a slab on grade situation, if somebody did like leveling compound at some point or repaired that slab, it would potentially make it look like your sill was embedded in concrete on the inside, even if it wasn't originally.
Yeah, and they're like concrete and gypsum based toppings that you could put on, materials of all sorts to build up that thickness that would look like concrete on the backside.
Yeah.
I also thought about I'm pretty sure that Seattle is seismically active, and one of the problems that happens is houses get shaken off of foundations in earthquakes, so it would be a way to keep the house on its foundation if there were side-to-side movement.
That's a really keen observation.
I don't know if it's a problem. Doesn't...
It'd be interesting to know if there are a lot of other houses in that area that were done that way. Maybe it was a building practice at the time that a lot of builders adopted.
Yeah, and that's what's so weird and interesting about building to me is that some things are very regional and even like hyper local. Like it's just something one builder does, and you see it on their houses only. This comes from Ethan. Hey there. I love your show and I've been listening nonstop for the past week. I'd love to hear you guys discuss monolithic domes. I'm 22 and looking to build my first home, which is sounding like a huge project, a 3-story dome tower. Monolithic domes are sprayed from the inside with insulation and then concrete, and I'd be putting the dome on a 2-story concrete circular tower with one or both first stories buried. I'm curious what you guys think about the process and how you would go about designing and building the interior with the potential for observatory bedrooms, insanely excellent R ratings for green energy and whatnot. Thank you guys, Ethan.
So first,
Mike.
I want to make sure Ethan is not a supervillain constructing a lair. Because when I heard 3-story monolithic dome, that's immediately where like. But when he mentions green buildings, sustainability, it's like okay, he's concerned about some other stuff too.
Mike, I'm guessing you've seen the previous boom in concrete dome structures in your lifetime. Am I right? Do you want to talk about when these were first conceived of?
When I was reading this, I had a flashback to me being like a teenager and going to visit my cousins for a birthday party and a neighbor building their house. And it was a dome concrete house that they were 3/4 the way through construction. It wasn't on a tower, as Ethan's talking about, but it was going to be backfilled with soil. And, we're walking through this big cavernous concrete thing. And, one end, of course, faced south, where they were going to have all the glass. So it was going to be an earth bermed with a skylight. There was a whole period in the 70s and early 80s where we saw a bunch of these go up and with mixed results. I'm more concerned about Ethan's below grade portion, the cylinder part, the tower part, than I would be about the dome part. as long as you don't bury them underground, then you're okay. But I think once you bury them underground, you have the waterproofing issue. But that's not what he's talking about here. There's a lot of concrete and there's a lot of foam that's going into this. I mean, pretty much you put up some wire mesh, you spray foam it, and then you put some shotcrete over that, and that's the way they end up being done.
And my
I've never tried
understanding
building
is
one.
like there's a formwork of an inflatable like balloon, right? And that's what you spray the foam onto, and then the foam gets the concrete layer and then presumably some waterproofing layer on top. And I think, the people who did this in the 70s and early 80s were motivated by the same thing that Ethan is, and that is the need for affordable housing that you can conceivably do yourself, right? This is sold as an easy to build thing, and of course it's tough because it's concrete, and of course it's airtight because it's all spray foam. But my short answer, Ethan, is build a wood light framed box on a concrete foundation or a block foundation. And, these are hard to build, right? This is not normal construction.
Do either of you have experience with geodesic domes?
Roofing one, but never building one.
Oh my gosh, you tell us what that's
Challenging.
like. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you roof a geodesic dome?
With asphalt shingles, you see a whole bunch of little, what are they, pentagons or something? No, they're actually octagon little panels is essentially what they end up being, with a lot of hip and ridge shingles covering all of those joints.
Just miserable.
It is.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it is. You want to make an expensive house to roof, then geodesic dome. Yeah.
There was a. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to say Ethan's project might be easier because if he is doing it all out of concrete, they can just finish that with a coating, and so it's going to shed water pretty well.
Interestingly, there's one of these across from my sister's house, and it's pretty apparent it's been under construction for a couple decades, or maybe 3, or maybe since the early 80s. But, I don't know. Of course, Carol and I and Liam talk about podcast questions at the dinner table, because doesn't everybody? And, Carol's first response was like, why does Ethan want to build a missile silo? You can buy those, Ethan. They're usually pretty affordable. I think it's the GES is the government agency that sells those for the military. So I would look into that if you want a concrete cylinder. Jeff, thoughts?
No, the only one of these that I'm familiar with is there's one in New Fairfield, and I know that it's probably 30, 40 years old, and it's a nightmare.
Keeping it dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it cracks and.
Yeah, I think that's the advice about concrete, right? Is it's not if it'll crack, it's when it'll crack.
Have you ever seen one of these, Andrew, in the Twin Cities?
I don't think so. I asked about geodesic domes because I know a guy who made his living in the 70s and 80s building them kind of all over the country, and his compound in Minnesota, he has 3 geodesic domes, 2 that are his house, and one that is the shop, and it's the way the space feels is really cool. It's so light and airy, and I think it's mathematically the most amount of livable square footage in a footprint. But his are in good shape. He actually put them on permanent wood foundations too, so he did it all himself, and it's just they look a little bit odd, and the resale on them, because all of these homes were built 30 to 50 years ago, and now they're turning over, and there's a little bit of a cult following, but not in the way that someone wants to pay a bunch of money for a beautiful mid-century modern house.
I think that's a special buyer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they are very cool.
Are these ones that you talk of? Are they multi-story inside the dome? Because like you talk about the livable space, it seems like a lot of volume that's not useful. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, so you do essentially like frame out a second floor. I think he may even have a third floor in one of them, but like his shop space especially is really cool because he's got all of his big tools on the first floor, and then he's got like a loft, to hang out in. But I think you like have to like frame basically loft a second story. It's not like you're not stacking floors on top of each other like you do in a regular frame
Platform,
house.
Yeah. Any other weird housing forms that Ethan should consider ahead of this one, maybe?
Aside from doing a concrete dome, I think he's got his heart set on the missile silo appearance. I mean, with the 2 levels underground. So there might be, site conditions are probably what's driving him. There might be some things there on the site that he's thinking about, well, this is going to work from a design perspective for what he's trying to do, both from an energy perspective and from the site location and sun and exposure and so on. I wonder what it would be like for somebody to go back, and I haven't gone back and read all of those old Mother Earth news magazines and the others that were popular at the time for folks that were building houses that were of the geodesic style, to see if we could apply new building science to them and building practices and make them affordable, which is always an issue when you're doing something which is unique, and or make it affordable and efficient, both in materials and in energy use.
Earth sheltered was like the big thing when I was a kid, right? And occasionally you'd see a house that was facing the south, and the other elevations were largely underground, and you would see, skylight shafts or flues sticking up from, often turf on top of the place. And I always thought that was so cool, except you get a little more savvy about how buildings work, and you realize that that's probably a humid, miserable mess in there, right? Especially with the waterproofing technologies available at the time. I think it would be easier to do that with some of the things we have today.
I think location. If you go out to the desert Southwest and you're in the side of a mountainside and you got very little water and you got well-drained soils and bedrock you're up against, then some of these projects are probably perfecly fine. I should go tour those when I go visit my house out in Arizona. I'm sure there are plenty of them out there.
I think you're talking about earth ships, am I right?
No, or just, I don't know. What's an earth ship as compared to a berm sheltered, house?
An earth ship is like a term coined by a specific architect, and they have a lot of recycled material in them. But the general construction method is tires filled with earth and then stuccoed. And this is, an owner-builder technology largely, and people are really into it who have done it. It sounds like a ton of work to me. It takes a lot of tires to build a house, and there are some environmental concerns too with what amounts to a landfill of tires, on your property.
And just to verify, used tires are not a healthy building material.
And we'll talk about that more in the after show.
Yeah.
I was going to add to that the plastic bottle houses. As you were talking, Patrick, I'm thinking of when the people who take all the plastic bottles, they stack them up and they put either concrete between them or something. It may work a little better with glass bottles than plastic, but I'm just wondering, do those plastic bottles really last exposed to UV light over time?
I'm guessing the bottle manufacturers never intended them for that purpose, if I had to guess. The glass windows, though, you've seen, they look really cool. The light that comes through those is amazing, yeah. Any thoughts before we part company, gents? Do you want to share words from the Building Science Symposium, Andrew?
I would just say that the science symposiums we've had this year have been fantastic. The speakers have been great. even though I've seen presentations multiple times now, I learned something new, especially when folks start asking questions in these different climate zones. And it sounds like we're going to have a few more coming up next year. So, we'll let you know when those are happening, and we'll hopefully be able to get one in your neck of the woods. I think the idea is, we did Kansas City and Tennessee and Texas this year, and we're going to try to hit more parts of the country next year.
Cool. I'd like to remind folks that All Access membership helps us keep the lights on here. And if you are an All Access member, stay tuned for the podcast after show. We're going to be talking about the toxicity of building materials and creating a healthy living environment for your clients. And Mike's on a couple of these. I think it's really an interesting conversation. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Andrew, Mike, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions, suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Thanks very much for listening.